Hey everybody. Probably our last regular video of the semester for learning and memory. Just a little bit I want to talk about in terms of mirror neurons for the chapter on social learning. Because in general, there's not too much new stuff going on in the brain here, more some simple ideas to remember. But mirror neurons are kind of cool. You might have heard of them before, depending on what classes that you've taken. And the evidence for mirror neurons is mixed, and depending on who you talk to, they'll be more or less excited about it. But we'll, show a little bit of evidence here for why we think mirror neurons are interesting and why they're relevant to the social learning that we're talking about here, right? So as a, for lack of a better term, higher form of learning, um, what do we see in terms of what's going on in the brain? And the truth is, a lot of it is the same, right? So social learning involves memories for both episodes, right, and skills. So we see aspects of declarative and non-declarative memory that can involve social learning, right? And so, with that in mind, we might think that there are some of the same brain areas that are involved in social learning as are involved in those types of learning as well. Um, but on the other hand, we know that really strong evidence of social learning is only evident in certain species. Humans and other species are really good at social learning, other species are not. So maybe there's something different about the way that we learn, and chimpanzees and dolphins and other similar animals of higher intelligence. And so maybe we have some more specialized brain structures, or at least some networks that work a little bit better than in species that aren't able to do this, right? So how is it done, right? We can see at the level of encoding, visual or auditory observations, right? If we're looking at what a model does, right? The person that we're observing and trying to engage in that behavior, right? We also see aspects of retrieval, right? We have to bring up actions or speech. What are we doing in a certain situation, right? And so, bigger picture question, how are memories for model actions translated into motor plans, right? We've watched somebody do something. How do we then engage in that same behavior? And mirror neurons seem to be a potential mechanism for how this works. So these were, first discovered, and people were very excited. So recording from neurons in primates were the first places where we started to see evidence of what we would call mirror neurons. That is, neurons that fire for both watching someone else perform an action and then doing that action yourself or the animal self, depending on who we're talking about. So an example would be if we're recording from a specific neuron, right, in a monkey, that neuron will fire when the monkey grasps a specific object and when it sees another monkey or an experimenter grasp that same object, right? So that's interesting. Mirror neurons seem to represent then a neural component of social memory, that is, being able to link behaviors that we've observed other people do with specific motor outputs that we would then also do ourselves. And what's really cool, especially from a psychologist point of view who wants to map kind of our cognitive and behavioral models onto what's going on in the brain, we can see evidence of different neurons that would represent behaviors that are true imitation versus behaviors that are emulation. So we do see some neurons that fire only during specific activities when they are either observed or performed by the individual. And there's other mirror neurons that fire specifically for the outcome of certain behaviors. That is, regardless of how the end is achieved, whether we're watching someone else do it or performing it ourselves, right? So the fact that we can see that difference in neural coding that matches the way that we've also described different types of behaviors is something that psychologists and neuroscientists have been very excited to see, right? And so, one question that we'll get to is, do humans have mirror neurons? Because we're talking a lot about monkeys, but let's talk a little bit about monkeys first, right? So this is an example of a study recording from mirror neurons, right? And so again, we can kind of expand our definition here, where mirror neurons fire when an individual or animal performs a particular goal-directed movement. That is a movement with a purpose. These are the types of movements and actions that are something that can be learned via social transmission, social learning, right? So when they're doing it themselves or observing someone else do that movement, right? So we can see here that if we're recording from a particular neuron, in this case in premotor cortex, which is in frontal cortex, right? It fires when this monkey is picking up a ball. It also increases in firing rate when it's watching an experimenter pick up the ball. So not even another monkey in this case, but somebody that's doing the research themselves, right? It also, in this case, this neuron does not fire when picking up a different object, and it doesn't fire when the experimenter picks up that object either. So again, this is a specific action for a specific object. The goal is specifically picking up this ball, and this particular neuron only increases in firing rate when the animal or someone else is picking up that particular ball. Right? And so this suggests that this type of activity promotes social understanding, cooperation, imitation, being able to learn appropriate behaviors, socially relevant behaviors from other people that can serve as models for an animal or for a person, right? What's also really cool is that mirror neurons fire even if the action itself is not directly observed, when there's enough information to suggest that the event has occurred. The example I like to use here is baseball related because, you know, I'm a baseball fan. But if you imagine, right, you know, the sound, the crack of the bat hitting the ball, right? Now, you could imagine a mirror neuron where if you were watching somebody play baseball, swinging and hitting the ball, right? You could imagine that if you were playing baseball, that same neuron would fire when you swing the bat and hit the ball. But let's say you're at a game and surprise, surprise, not paying attention to what's going on in the field, because that happens sometimes, right? But you're looking down at your phone and you hear the crack of the bat. That neuron, that same mirror neuron is going to fire because that sound is enough evidence to suggest that the event has actually occurred, right? So you don't even necessarily have to see it, which is very interesting, right? So now moving on to humans, right, where, you know, that evidence was for monkeys, but we do see at least some evidence of this in humans as well. We typically don't have a lot, like we've talked about, there's not a lot of opportunities to record from neurons directly in human brains unless they're already, you know, undergoing surgery for epilepsy or cancer or something like that. But we do have some evidence from EEG and fMRI studies that suggest that there are mirror neurons and mirror neuron systems in the brain that seem to be related to the types of things that we see in monkeys in those kind of frontal areas. And it happens from all different types of studies, so kind of what we would call classical mirror neuron studies based on motor movements, but also auditory studies, studies related to touch, and even emotional expression. All different types of behaviors where you know, we're talking about actions or experiences that can be observed and executed by an individual. We can see frontal cortex activation that suggests that there are mirror neurons in humans as well, although again, we have less of that kind of direct neural recording evidence that we would like to see usually for that kind of neural coding information. So, you know, there's a couple other brain areas to remember that are talked about in the book, but I did want to just talk a little bit about mirror neurons here today. So again, please post on the discussion board if any of the topics from either the behavioral part of the chapter or the brain part of the chapter that you want a little more information about, right? We can work through that. But otherwise, good luck. This is the last of the new information that we'll cover for this semester. So congratulations on getting through our half online semester. And hopefully we'll have another chance to talk as a group before we get into the last week of the semester. But if not, keep staying healthy and stay safe.